Tanya and Maëlle will take you through sustainability planning and how it can be used to support your teams. Welcome, Tanya and Maëlle.
So thank you very much, Chris. So today my name is Tanya McDonald. I'm Director of Programs at the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement. I will be presenting today with my colleague, Maëlle Marchand, who is an improvement lead at the same organization. So we're happy to be with you today. So we're going to continue the conversation around sustainability planning. So as you heard Julia Moore mention just minutes ago, that sustainability planning will set you up for success for sustainability. So we're here to walk you through a bit of information about what sustainability means, and also a practical tool that will help you work through the process. So what is long-term success? So in this presentation, we're using long-term success and sustainability really interchangeably. And I think that I don't need to convince anyone here about the importance of quality improvement work in our daily lives to really make sure that we're improving, whether it be patient outcomes, the care and well-being of our care teams and their experiences, as well as any population health outcomes or processes that we wish to improve. And some of us also may be focused on cost or effectiveness or appropriateness, depending on what our quality improvement initiative is. But we all know that the sustainability piece is really our most significant challenge. Many of you may remember in 2009, Monique Bégin did publish an editorial in the Canadian Medical Association Journal about Canada being a land of perpetual pilot projects. And so even though that editorial was published just over 10 years ago today, for me, I think the message still rings true that sustainability is really a key challenge in moving our projects from quality improvement initiatives and projects to actually a sustained, effective program. So what is long-term success? I think that there are two different ways to look at it. It could be seen as either an endpoint with a start and a finish, and then more of a linear process, or I think the way that we tend to look at long-term success or sustainability is more about a process that goes alongside the implementation, and it happens concurrently. And then that way we have opportunities to test, to learn what we're doing, to monitor and adapt what our interventions are based on the data that we're collecting, and identifying those threats and opportunities throughout so that we can mitigate, so that we have a really solid plan concurrently around our implementation plan and our sustainability planning. So for this presentation, the definition that we're using for sustainability is a dynamic process where staff, stakeholders, whoever's involved in the quality improvement initiative have the capacity and the capability to monitor and modify activities and interventions in relation to the health outcomes or processes that you're trying to achieve, and really be able to respond to those threats and opportunities as they arise. And so we think about defining sustainability. We can also think about different ways of looking at it. So as Julia Moore mentioned just in her previous presentation, it's important to focus on your actual implementation project that you're trying to sustain, as well as your outcomes, as well as your implementation strategies. So when we're thinking about sustainability, it could be about ensuring that we continue to gain and benefit from those health benefits from the quality improvement initiative, depending on what those were, and ensuring that they're sustained in the long term. We can also think about continuing the activity or the intervention that we've put forward. We sometimes refer to that in our work as routinisation in French, or making it more of a routine common practice in the work that we're doing. We can also think about it from a capability or capacity building perspective within our teams, because as we learn from the implementation cycle and we're measuring and monitoring our data and learning from our implementation strategies, we really develop capacity within the team to be able to recognize what are those opportunities that are arising and how that we can create some solutions that can address those problems as they arrive within the team. We can also think about it more from a learning from the adaptation piece, which Julia also mentioned. And so we know that we have an idea that we're implementing an initiative, but it will adapt over time, and that's expected. So for example, in some of the work we're doing around appropriate use of antipsychotics, there is a strategy to do medication reviews and team interventions, and we know that those will adapt over time depending on the different contexts that the teams are working in, and that's okay. It is along the path to sustainability. And if cost is one of your outcomes as well, then it's important to look at the investments that you've put into your quality improvement initiative and what are the benefits in the long term. So really the idea is about that continuous learning throughout the journey to be able to adapt and adopt over time. And so when you're with your teams and you're reflecting on sustainability of your own initiatives, I think it's important to think about what sustainability means for you and the work that you're doing. What do you want to sustain? For how long? Are there any sustainability issues that are unique to your project, to your setting, to your population? And what are they? So it's important to talk about them, to identify them, and make sure they're part of the conversation. It's also very important to identify what your sustainability goals are. Again, as Julia Moore mentioned, you want to sustain your implementation strategies, your implementation initiative, as well as the outcomes. And so it's really important that for you as a team that you identify what those are and prioritize them and make sure that you're giving them the proper attention as you move forward. Now, when we talk about the sustainability challenge, which I don't think anyone here would disagree that it is definitely a challenge to make sure that the initiatives that you've all been working on are sustained over time. And so we know that this is difficult. There is evidence to support the challenge around sustainability. We know that many organizations have different priorities that they have to manage every day. And therefore, if quality improvement is sort of a task that's been given to you off the side of your desk, it is going to even make it more difficult for you to focus and to continue on with that work. Culture change within the organization, especially when you're talking about behavior change and different changes in practice, do take time. Addressing the easy things first. From an implementation perspective, we sometimes focus on what we'll call the quick wins. And then as you delve into the more complex cases or complex processes within your change, then sustainability becomes a little bit more precarious. Reaching the limit of managerial commitment. We know that leadership engagement endorsement is extremely important in moving initiatives forward. And so you need to mitigate if that wanes over time, especially as priorities change. And I don't think any of us can deny the fact that COVID-19 has definitely demonstrated that priorities do change rather quickly in the healthcare system. Not having enough time. A lot of times quality improvement is seen as a off the side of your desk type of opportunity, but I think we all know the importance of continuing to improve, especially when we're talking about patient experience and the health and well-being of our care team. Incomplete initial implementation. We didn't have a chance to apply our strategies fully to their full capacity, and also failure to recognize that implementation and sustainability do occur alongside and need to be embedded within one another. And so how can sustainability managed? Well, lucky for all of us, there's lots of frameworks and tools that exist out there that can help us along the way. I think what's really important is finding the right tool, the right framework that actually speaks to you as your team and that aligns with your objectives, your sustainability goals, so that you can work through the process, identify those threats and opportunities and mitigate over time, and making sure that it's done alongside implementation and always part of the conversation. So today we're going to present one such tool. It's called the long-term success tool. So I'm going to pass over the microphone to Maëlle.
Thanks, Tanya, and you can go to the next slide, please. So as we know in practice, and as Tanya just mentioned, thinking and planning for sustainability can be super challenging. So one researcher, Laura Lennox, studied the topic and she developed the long-term success tool to help teams think about the sustainability of their initiatives in more practical and useful ways. So this is a tool that we often use at CFHI in our own programming, but now some of you have had the opportunity to actually use it over the summer in some sustainability planning for CPSI's safety improvement projects. So the tool itself is on this slide, and as you can see, it's super, super simple. It's a survey completed individually by members of an entire team. And the intention behind the tool is to give an overall picture of how an improvement project is progressing and to identify that team's strengths, challenges, needs moving forward, and possible suggestions for doing so. So next slide, Tanya. So we only have limited time today, so I'm not going to take a too deep of a dive, but the survey does consist of 12 Likert or rating scales, which Laura Lennox had researched and identified as factors that impact the long-term success of improvement projects. And those factors can generally be divided up into the three categories that are on the slide. So you'll be assessing through the tool characteristics of the people that are part of the project, so your teammates, the practices that are in place, and then the project setting or the environment itself. So next slide, Tanya. So how a team would use the tool when assessing and planning for the long-term success of their projects is really well shown on the cycle on the slide. So first, again, team members would complete the anonymous survey individually and reflect on those 12 factors that are listed in the tool. Then a member of the team, whether that's an eval or team lead, would compile all the feedback of all the team members and produce essentially high-level group results, which would identify some overall themes about the project's strengths and areas for improvement. And that's collected from the ratings, but also in the comment box and the suggestion box. So after all the results are compiled, the team lead would then call a meeting to discuss the implications of those findings as a group. And then it would be on the team as a whole to create a plan of action to address any weaknesses or gaps identified regarding the long-term success of their project or initiative. And then the team would start to actually action that plan. So that's the general cycle, but it's important to note here that sustainability planning is really cyclical. So it's an ongoing process. You're not going to just do this once. It's helpful to start thinking about the long-term success of your initiatives from the start. And it's also important to continue ensuring it after the project or initiative has ended. So that being said, Laura Lennox herself recommends using this tool about every 3 to 6 months to monitor the progress of the project and assess new risks that emerge over time and to help identify those new strategies to mitigate those risks. And the reason that we do this is to make sure that the initiative in the end is more robust, resilient, and ultimately just more successful in the long term. So next slide, Tanya. Thank you. So if we consider the evidence as to why your team should be using a sustainability approach, like Tanya mentioned and Julia Moore as well, like it's very important. And so if we're asking ourselves, like, what is the evidence to support this and to help influence the processes and practices? Next slide, Tanya. So Laura Lennox did do a longitudinal study herself across various improvement teams and programs. And she herself found that the tool was particularly helpful for supporting collaboration among team members, as well as decision-making and action planning for those who are hoping to sustain their initiatives. So overall, the tool, for example, is intended to guide your team through reflection on the sustainability of your projects in the hopes that it'll foster discussion that'll enable some brainstorming, decision-making, planning, and action. And ultimately, again, this is just to help improve the long-term success of your project. Next slide, Tanya. So tying this back to you in terms of the tool and your own planning, the long-term success tool is one sustainability approach or tool. And like Tanya mentioned, there are others out there. It's about what tool or approach will help your team get to your own objectives. So this is the tool that we've been using at CFHI, but there are others out there as well. And next slide, Tanya. So if we can offer some of our own insights from CFHI in terms of what's been helpful in terms of sustainability planning. First of all, start thinking of your projects as initiatives. That way you'll get in the frame of mind that there is no clear end date to a project. It is an initiative, it's ongoing. And also, instead of planning to sustain your project, which doesn't leave much room for adaptation, more so shift your perspectives to instead sustaining the positive outcomes of your initiative. That way you can flexibly shift the delivery of your initiative as needed, as those challenges and those barriers pop up, and it'll help you sustain those objectives and gains. I also already mentioned, start thinking and planning for sustainability as early as possible, and make sure that you have a very clear plan or approach in place to monitor your progress, as well as to identify and address those new risks to the sustainability of your initiative. So one way that we've just explored is using the long-term success tool, but of course there are other strategies and other tools out there. So whatever makes sense for your team is what's good to use. And lastly, make sure to hold your team accountable for the success of your initiative, even after you've implemented. You can create a timeline to review, discuss, and action any new threats to the sustainability of your initiative. And for that, some key things to consider are who will be leading these efforts, how often, with who. So having a clear plan in place for monitoring and actioning the sustainability of your initiative while you're implementing, but also after, will help you and your team actually ensure the long-term success of your project. So I can see that Chris is creeping up on my screen, which means that we're at time. In terms of questions, we won't have time for that today. But please either type them in the chat or ask them in our upcoming workshop this afternoon. I can also ask CPSI staff to include my email for you to reach out and ask any questions in either official language. So thank you, everyone.